Hi, I want to show you the structure of spiritual life at Liberty University, a structure that has at its core the experience of a student. But before I get into those details, let's rewind a bit and look at 1, where we used to be, and 2, where we're at today. In the spring of 2015, if you looked at the landscape of spiritual life at Liberty, you'd have found that there were 4 primary departments, 4 vice presidents, if you will, that were responsible for just about all the co-curricular spiritual life activity of the school. The Office of Spiritual Development oversaw 2 departments, Office of Spiritual Programs and the Center for Global Engagement. Student Affairs oversaw the Campus Pastor's Office, Online Communities and Christian Service, or simply CSER. Enrollment Management, and under that the Recruitment Office, oversaw the Department of Ministry Teams. School of Religion oversaw the Center for Ministry Training. If you've ever wondered who was responsible for a certain spiritual life activity on campus, it was probably Center for Ministry Training. They were the catch-all of sorts for a tremendous amount of spiritual activity, including ministries like Awake, Block Party, Bus Stop Ministry, Campus Serve, and on and on and on. So in the spring of 2015, an executive leadership team was formed to evaluate all this, and what they found was that there were certainly good things happening. No one could point at any one of these 7 departments and say that there were not examples of students who had positive experiences. But what was undeniable were 2 obvious issues. When it came to the spiritual life landscape at Liberty, there was 1, inconsistent messaging, 2, inefficient use of university resources. See, the problem was each of those 7 departments was independent of one another. Each of them was a self-sustaining entity whose existence was dependent on how many students they could get involved in their own activity and events. So each of them was structured with their own budget folks, their own creative folks, but bigger than that, their own vision, their own mission. What this meant for the student was across the landscape there were multiple voices shouting at them for attention, and the departments that were larger were shouting the loudest. The problem was inconsistent messaging. There wasn't one voice telling a student about spiritual life opportunities and the different ways to get involved. There were multiple ones, each with their own focus. The other problem was inefficient use of university resources. Because each of these 7 departments was a self-sustaining entity responsible for every aspect of their own mission, the staff structure and the budgets for each of them was built accordingly. So at the end of May 2015, the leadership team tasked with overseeing this recognized it made sense to realign all the co-curricular spiritual life of the school under the campus pastor, David Nasser. So all departments realigned under the Office of Spiritual Development. If there were 7 bodies operating out of 4 different houses before, then now there were 7 bodies operating under one roof. At least now there was central oversight. At least now there was some measure of accountability. But in truth, realignment helped slow down some inefficiency and inconsistency, but it was still 7 distinct bodies, still structured the same way, now living in the same house, but each of them still operating in similar fashion. Still plenty of examples of inconsistent messaging, still inefficient resources. The bigger vision, though, was to centralize spiritual life so that there were not 7 bodies, but instead one body with different parts, all serving the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is, of course, the student. So the current structure of spiritual life doesn't look like this. It looks like this. Starting in the center, from the question, what is best for a student, all spiritual life flows out of this structure. At the top, the Office of Spiritual Development continues to provide management and oversight of all of it. Beneath that are 6 departments that serve as filters for every instance of a student's spiritual life experience. Let's go through them each. LU Send is the filter for all student group travel. That means, from a spiritual life standpoint, no longer is any single department handling the logistics of their own travel. Before, the Center for Ministry Training did their own trips, the Center for Global Engagement did their own trips. Different trips, different standards of what's expected. No longer. Now, travel funnels through one group who is tasked with ensuring that every student who travels has an excellent experience regardless of who they go with. In similar fashion, the department LU Stages is the filter for all spiritual life events on campus. Previously, the Office of Spiritual Programs had a certain standard of excellence for an event like Campus Community, but that same standard was not applied to a department like Campus Pastors when they held an event on campus. So instead of different departments doing different events, one department, LU Stages, is tasked with ensuring every event from convocation to a weekend retreat is done at an acceptable level of excellence. LU Serve, on the other hand, is a completely reimagined vision of student service and how to account for it. Instead of multiple departments across campus focused on different elements of outreach or ministry or service, like the Center for Global Engagement and Center for Ministry Training had been, LU Serve is the umbrella for all expressions of engagement with the student body. So within its oversight is a local and domestic office and an international office, each of which is tasked with being the primary catalyst for developing opportunities for students to engage their world. So if a student wants to serve in downtown Lynchburg, they go to LU Serve to explore opportunities. If a student wants to learn about how he or she can get involved in the fight against sex trafficking, it's through LU Serve. And if a student goes and spends the summer serving abroad at a youth camp in Cambodia, it's LU Serve. All partnership, ministry, and mission opportunities, both local, domestic, and international, now flow through one department, LU Serve. Additionally, under the previous system, Christian Service, or CSER, service was mandated as a graduate requirement. Every student volunteered 20 hours a semester with a specific organization, and it worked. Students picked a church or a nonprofit or some on-campus opportunity, put in 20 hours, and met the requirement. But what was broken was that the very department tasked with overseeing service opportunities was not structured to account for all service. So as a result, there were many examples of students serving on campus, local, domestic, and international, but CSER didn't account for that activity because it wasn't part of that student's 20 hours per semester with a specific organization. Many students served outside of CSER's oversight. So now, LU Serve is structured to account and reward all instances of students serving by replacing the 20 hours a semester system with a point system. LU Serve determines and allocates for each example of service a specific amount of points, and the graduate requirement would simply be a set amount of points. The value, though, is that a student who serves often accumulates points that in theory can be spent to earn added benefits, such as a lower cost on a trip. So working with the local and domestic office in LU Serve, a student serving in the nursery at Thomas Road is given a set amount of points. A student working with the international office in LU Serve, spending his or her summer break in Cambodia, is given a different set of points. The same student is obtaining service points from multiple different activities. But hold on, you might ask. That sounds like a lot of outreach, but what about on campus? What about spiritual life for the student? What department is helping a student grow spiritually so when they go engage in the community around them, they're equipped to do so? That's the LU Shepherd Office. The LU Shepherd Office is a staff of spiritual mentors who are visible, engaged leaders on campus. They are available to all. They serve students on campus. They get connected locally. They are points of contact for a department like LU Serve. They are like spiritual yeast that are spread throughout the entire structure. They're not just campus pastors who meet with students after they get in trouble. They are proactive spiritual mentors who are further upstream than the previous model allowed. Additionally, within the LU Shepherd oversight are all 1,400 student leadership positions of a spiritual nature, 250 student shepherds, and 1,100 plus community leaders. These are spiritual mentors in residential halls, living among students, serving as eyes and ears for the LU Shepherd office. They are an army of spiritual leaders spread throughout the student body to ensure no one falls through the cracks of discipleship, development, and growth. In similar fashion, the Liberty Worship Collective is a new vision of worship. Instead of different bands with their own identity, like in the past with the Department of Ministry teams, Exodus, Crimson Flood, there is now one distinct worship collective that is available to the entire campus and is also promoting liberty at a high level of excellence in their travel. One group called the Worship Collective, Different Expressions. And finally, the Center for Online Engagement is the online platform tasked with sourcing all spiritual resources and activities offered to residential students and offering comparable resources for the online community. It blankets all of spiritual life, asking the question, how are we reaching our online population with these same resources? Now, notice that in the new model, none of the previous 7 departments even exist, because instead of 7 different departments that are each responsible from conception to delivery for their own product, This structure divides up spiritual life into departments that each have a specific role in the process. It's one collective body working together at multiple stages with an appropriate system of checks and balances. Why this model? Because it solves those two big problems we talked about earlier. One, inconsistent messaging. There's not 7 departments shouting for attention. There's now one voice showing all the different ways students can get involved. And there's not inconsistent branding. There's one brand with multiple different expressions of that brand. 2, inefficient resources. In this new model, it's one body where the parts are all dependent on one another. There's no need for 2 departments to have overlap of assets, resources, or staffing. The system of checks and balances is what ensures the message is consistent and the resources are efficient. In this new system, we're able to account for all instances of spiritual life on campus. That's spiritual life at Liberty. It's cleaner, it's efficient, it's consistent. Perhaps most important, it's actually scalable to account for any number of students that pass through our doors. Because that's the ultimate goal. The goal is for every single student of Liberty to show up and be offered the same level of opportunity, access, and excellence when it comes to spiritual life and spiritual growth.